Hey, and welcome to another episode of the Blue Screen Brothers. My name is Alex, and together we have my favorite brother, Olav, with me. And how are you doing today, Olav?
I'm just peachy. It's
Itchy.
just another day on another device, right?
Another day on another device. And talking about devices, we have a VIP with us today, Chauncey Larsen from Microsoft. Hey.
Hey, Alex. Hey, Olaf. Thanks for inviting me.
So why don't you tell
Uh,
us a little bit about yourself and why we're talking about devices?
yeah, absolutely. So I work on the Surface Commercial Technical Marketing team. So I'm a little bit different from the typical marketing guy. I actually get the pleasure of basically getting to nerd out and geek out with all of our devices and talk to all of our different my peers across the company in Windows and Intune to really figure out what the technical kind of capabilities and stories are of our devices. And I get to bring all of that together. And so I've been with the company since 2012. So I actually started on day one of when RT came out. In fact, I was selling RT in a little kiosk in a mall. So I've been part of this Surface journey for a long time. And I'm very passionate about our devices. And I'm very passionate about, I think, what our devices present. And so kind of going back to what you mentioned around like talking about our devices, well, we've had some exciting stuff lately. We just announced the new Copilot Plus PCs, our Surface Pro and Surface Laptop. We actually announced some commercial devices back in March. So it's been a pretty exciting time for Surface for sure. So yeah, that's kind of what I'd love to chat with you guys
And,
today
and
about.
the reason why I brought you in is because I've spent hours and hours trying to explain Olav what a NPU and a
Ooh,
AI CPU
yeah.
is.
No,
And it
I tried to get help to get my ARM RT device from 2012 to work because I still have it. So and it's still running, and it's in my device list in my private profile. So I just need some support to start running newer software on it. That's the reason why I asked you to get Chauncey in with us.
all right.
Yeah. Yeah. I literally just updated my RT yesterday. Actually, it was the first time I'd poor thing's been hasn't been updated in a long time. But same thing. I was like, hey, I haven't actually touched my RT in a while, so I was kind of working with that. And now it's a nice museum piece on my shelves there. But yeah, happy to talk about AI PCs. I think this is such a momentous time in the industry where I think we're seeing a fundamental shift in the way that people are going to be interacting with their devices and people are going to be interacting with data. And at the core of that is this notion of an AI PC, and more specifically, the hardware that backs an AI PC in the case of the NPU. I'm using a whole lot of different acronyms right now, so we'll kind of go through all of those acronyms here in a little bit. But yeah, it's a pretty exciting time. So you want me to start with devices first, and then we'll go into AI PC? Does that work?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, cool. So I mentioned a little earlier that we on May 20th we actually announced our Copilot Plus PCs, and in fact, in the consumer market, they are going to be coming out on the 18th, so right around the corner in the U.S. And then for commercial devices, they'll come out later in September. And we can talk about that if you want. But more importantly, I think the big note about Copilot Plus PCs is some of these requirements around it, because I think these requirements really define what these mean for this kind of future. And I should be using my pen. Why am I using a little laser pointer here? But if you really kind of think about this new Copilot Plus PCs as a category, this category is defined really by certain requirements that come from a hardware perspective, but also the software that's going to be built into the device that really, I think, changes the game with, like I said, how people are going to be interacting with things. So let's start about the hardware side. We'll get kind of the easy ones out of the way. So it's going to come with that 256 gigs of storage. So there's a reason behind that. We want to make sure that you have plenty of storage for some of the experiences that are going to be built in, but also it's kind of a new day and age. Let's set a new bar for how our devices should kind of be launching. 16 gig of RAM, honestly, again, that's a new bar. I think in a lot of ways, 16 gigs of RAM kind of provides that necessary minimum in order to make sure that AI experiences are really good, and that I think the rest of the compute is really solid as well. And probably the most exciting one, and I'm actually going to see if I can zoom in on this real quick, is this NPU. Whoop, there we go. Is this NPU that has 40 plus tops. And that's interesting, right? That's kind of an important one because the NPU, or the neural processing unit, is really what's going to be driving so many AI experiences moving forward. It's not the only thing that drives AI experiences, and so I'll talk about that here in a little bit as well. But central to, I think, efficient and sustained AI is this NPU. It's a new microprocessor that's built directly onto the die. And it just does some really, really powerful and really, really cool things. So all three of these, the 256 gigs of storage, the 16 gigs of RAM, and then this 40 TOPS NPU, creates what we call a Copilot Plus PC. The other thing technically as a requirement is this little bit here where it has a Copilot keyboard key on the keyboard. And then we obviously want Copilot as part of the experience, but I think it's actually beyond just what everyone considers Copilot, like Copilot Windows. It's these new experiences like Copilot Runtime and our Copilot libraries, which are all kind of baked into that NPU story that I'll talk about in a little bit. But they are central, I think, to kind of that experience. So before I move over to what those devices actually are, you guys have any questions on kind of what you're seeing here?
What's the reason that we needed an NPU instead of just utilize the GPU or CPU or NPUs?
Yeah. I'll talk about the differences after we kind of go through some of these devices. Or actually, why don't we pivot over there and then I'll talk about the devices. How about that? So if you think about, each microprocessor has always had its own kind of specific duty, right? Like, think about the CPU, the brains of the computer, the foundational computing unit that's been around since, we sent people to the moon. That computer is really very efficient at doing a very specific kind of workload, which is that scalar kind of single line of compute. Phenomenal for running your typical applications, Word, PowerPoint, web browsers, Adobe, you kind of name it, in terms of like what we're looking at with like a typical compute, right? It's kind of the brain, it's the foundation of how we work. Well, at some point, CPU kind of hit an efficiency bandwidth limit, right? And we had to introduce the graphics processing unit to do more things around bigger data models and do more things around like 2D and 3D rendering. And so we really actually couldn't do a lot of like some of the newest things that we see around gaming, or the newest things we see around like, photography or video editing without the GPU. And GPU became such an important moment, I think, in the way that compute evolved, years back. I mean, GPU is not exactly all that new either at this point. But even GPU is pretty hot. It can get kind of, power hungry. It can kind of drive the need for more heat dissipation and everything like that, which is why you typically see like any device that requires like a dedicated GPU, for instance, it's a little bit bulkier, or sometimes it's more of that kind of desktop form factors, like even like our laptop Studio 2 over there, a little bit bigger. And that's because we want to be able to dispel the heat that's coming off that GPU, because the more processing that happens, the more heat that it creates. Well, in step this kind of oncoming wave of AI. And you've got folks within Microsoft, you've got folks within our chip makers like Intel and AMD and Qualcomm, and we all partnered together to try to find what's that new frontier in processing, what is that new capability, and that's where the neural processing unit came out. And then the neural processing unit's really good at being hyper efficient at running massive data models in a relationship kind of style, like all at once, and kind of running in a matrix, right? So if you think about how AI typically works, AI is not doing things in single lines. In general, AI, what makes it special is it does it in relationships. I can compute this information about how your face is, but I need to compare that with expressions, or I need to compare that with gender, or I need to compare that with race, or kind of whatever you want to add in there. All of those things require matrices of information being computed at once. And the NPU was really created to do that as efficiently as possible. You can actually do some of it on GPU. The GPU is actually pretty powerful in terms of running AI, which is why you see like NVIDIA doing so well in this AI age. But again, with the GPU, it creates power, and it requires power. It requires heat. So in order to do massive AI models, you have to have a pretty beefy GPU. Can get kind of expensive. The NPU, on the other hand, can do it very efficiently and do it really lower power side of the thing. So I think we have this ability to very efficiently run NPU based AI. And that means that it can now run in the background in a sustained fashion. And why is that important? So it's not about, oh, AI is always running. Now really that's kind of the case everywhere. I mean, if you have a phone in your pocket, you probably have AI running all day long. But what it does provide is, instead of having to call to the cloud to create any of that compute, or instead of having to do call on AI will get to a point on the end device to where it can proactively think on your behalf. And it's so funny. We joke about, like, well, that sounds like Clippy. Not quite. A little bit better than Clippy, right? But what it does provide is contextual awareness. So if I'm doing something and I need support, maybe I'm in a web browsing session and I find something and I need to be able to call some web browsing is probably not a good one, because actually I'm connected to the web, but maybe I'm in PowerPoint and I need to figure out how to build a relationship on a model within that PowerPoint. Rather than having to open up another application, AI will at some point be able to intelligently say, hey, this is what you're trying to achieve. Let me help you with that. And we're getting away from having to be very specific with how we work with our devices, where we're asking the device very specifically, this is what I want to do, to where we can be a little bit more fuzzy with it. Now we can think about illogically what I'm trying to achieve, and the computer can intelligently, based off of relationships, based off of inferencing, how we can bring those things together. So that's a long way of saying the NPU is a very efficient way of bringing AI to the edge, of bringing AI down to the computer in a fashion that is really just going to, I think, change the game moving forward. And I'm super excited about it, because I think it's, as you'll see with like the Copilot Plus PCs, we've got some really cool things coming out. But it also is, I think, kickstarting the industry, and that's what I'm most excited about. Is Microsoft will come up with really, really cool things, but now that it's more accessible, and now that developers really can kind of hop on board and very easily actually bring AI into their applications, we're just going to see a completely new wave of the way that people can interact with their device.
To kind of flip it the other way around, the same way that they always say that if the black box in an airplane is built to sustain everything and anything, why don't you build a plane of the black box material? So why don't we use the NPU for everything? Because it doesn't disperse that much heat, it doesn't use that much energy. So why don't we use the NPU for everything?
It's a good question. Very similar to how we don't use the GPU for everything. Sometimes it actually just makes more sense to use a specialized tool, right? Like, we're not using a wrench to beat a nail down, and just as much as I'm not going to take a hammer to screw a bolt around. Sometimes they actually have their right purpose. And the NPU is really good at doing matrix level of information, but it's not really built for doing kind of that scalar model. So there would take some re-architecting to a certain degree to make sure that an application could run on the NPU. And is that really worth the load? Probably not, right? Because you've got so much built on that CPU in terms of capability. Instead, why don't we remove some of the burden that might be on CPU? So stuff like AI that might be burdening, like from a background blur perspective, or from really any AI for that matter. If the AI is having to use CPU, if we can target that for the NPU, that removes all of those applications, all of that heat, all of that power from the CPU over to the GPU, over to the NPU. And so now we can just let the CPU do what it does best. So yeah, I think more things will move to the NPU. Actually, I'm crossing my fingers, and I'm hoping, and I think this will be right around the corner, that most security things will end up on the NPU. Because if you think about, like, security now today, in a lot of ways, is built around machine learning, and it's built around, like, constantly updated AI definitions. Well, if I don't have to run that on the CPU, talk about a major workload that we can get over to the NPU. That to me is a huge future that I'm hoping that we go towards pretty quickly. And in fact, I've seen some third-party security folks starting to already look at the NPU. So it's I'm not alone in thinking this. I just can't wait for Microsoft to also hop on that train. But even with the GPU, I think there will always be a case where AI, for instance, will probably run across all three. There's going to be workloads that the CPU, GPU, and NPU combined can actually provide a very powerful AI experience, and you'll see that on the our Pro 10 and Laptop 6, our first AI PCs of the year. You can run AI perfectly fine on those. But where the NPU does become that specialized processor is that sustained workload. So if we have something that's constantly running in the background, or something that needs to run kind of more like at a beck and call capability. So like, again, background blur, or if you think about like our voice focus capability, so the ability to isolate out sound. Well, we got to constantly run that. It's not something that you want to spin up and spin down either on the CPU or GPU. And the NPU is very good at kind of just constantly running things, whereas this GPU and CPU can burst pretty easily, right? That's their kind of efficiency.
That's the thing you're talking about, background blur and audio filtering. It works now without an NPU. Why do we need that on a computer?
Ooh, that's a great question. So if you think about background blur today, most of our background blur capabilities across Teams, Zoom, kind of insert any meeting application that's out there, or even like non-meeting applications, right? All of those are done really in the cloud. So they're taking your video signal from your device, they're doing all of the compute up in the cloud, and then they're sending it back. It's not really all that efficient because we're having to travel and we have to go back. And on top of that, there's a bit of a latency. And don't get me wrong, the technology is really cool and it's really, really good. But yeah, exactly. If you're moving back and forth, you'll notice it actually it has to catch up, right? Because it's traversing that constantly. And again, we're talking milliseconds, but still those milliseconds add up very quickly. So if I can bring all of that compute down to the device, that does a few things for me. One, I get the latency almost gets removed entirely, right? Because now I'm doing that entire compute locally on the device before I even send the signal up. That also means that I'm not reliant on the engine in the cloud. So from a Microsoft perspective, there's some cost savings there for anyone that's really kind of running those kind of models in the cloud. We're now running those entirely on the device. But that also means that like I can potentially keep all that data and all that information local as well. So I'm not having to traverse the model of my face and everything, or sorry, the model that is comparing my face up back to the cloud. So again, it's all about efficiency and bringing that local to the device. The other thing that's nice about it is oftentimes these models have been hyper trained on very specific things. And so I like background blur, for instance, on our devices, we've done a significant amount of very responsible training. And I like to throw the responsible word out there because I think it's important that you are very inclusive about that you train the models on models to make sure that anyone and everyone of every color, shape, size being is included in that. We fine tune those models locally to be as accurate as possible. And so you'll also notice that in addition to not having to face that latency problem, but that highly trained model typically makes the background blur as an example, a little bit better. It's a little bit cleaner. You won't see sometimes that halo that's around your head, or your hand may or may not disappear. Or if you are actually trying to show something in the background, it'll actually try to scan out to see what you're doing. So it does a pretty good job. Yeah, exactly. Of bringing in the human notion of it, because again, it's not having to do all that traversal. And I think that's, again, where NPU is going to be so important, is for very specific workloads, not all workloads, very specific workloads. Those models should be living on the device. It just makes sense. It's a lot more efficient for everyone involved. The other
You
thing too,
mentioned
I'll
this.
say is,
Yep.
because it captures that information before it goes to the cloud. Technically, that means that I can now use that capability on any application that has a video feed, right? Because I'm actually doing that crunching, that information, before it even hits the application. So that includes stuff like Cloud PC or Windows 365. That includes any video call capability. We could theoretically actually capture that information before it goes to the video call. And now we've opened up the APIs to where if Zoom or if Google Meets or whatever wants to take advantage of that local AI capability with just a toggle in their system, we have that ability now. You can very easily control that within your interface. So I think this is just barely touching the tip of the iceberg here. Sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, you mentioned about all these models, and I think for a lot of people who don't know what we're talking about, this could align well with this bar you mentioned. So we need for Copilot PC Plus to be capable, it needs 16 gigs of RAM. It needs a certain amount of disk because the models is just a huge database of knowing what you're looking for. So the NPU traverse that information very fast to identify what you're looking for and excluding what you're not looking for. So in a certain way, everyone is talking about 16 gigs of memory. Is that really where Windows is now? Or is that a Copilot Plus PC?
I would say it's a Copilot Plus PC. Windows runs on Windows 11 runs on 8 gigs, right? I mean, like, even our if I kind of go back to like our AI PCs, so like the Pro 10 or the Laptop 6, we do have models of 8 gigs of RAM on those. So it's really good for like kind of that entry use. I personally would probably go with the 16 gig of RAM. It's a little bit more suitable for what I need out of a device. But the 16 gigs of RAM really, I think, is going to be critical to these new devices, these Copilot Plus PCs, both because you're going to want that for all up efficiency, but also you're going to want that for AI, right? Like AI is not only going to need the CPU, the NPU. Just like any application, you got to still activate RAM, right? RAM is going to be an important part. So I think that 16 gigs of RAM will provide a good foundation to be able to run all of the AI capabilities, plus run, whatever application that you need to. And that's actually something that we really focused on with these Copilot Plus PCs, is we wanted to make sure that you could, as a customer, run every single AI model that we're sending out with the device. So stuff like Recall, which we can talk about if you want. All of our Windows Studio effects, live translation, so the ability to do captions with translation from 40 different languages into English. All of that stuff can run at once on the NPU. You're still going to tax your RAM. And so it's still worth having a pretty decent amount of RAM, and 16 gigs of RAM is pretty decent. And we'll definitely, at least, again, set the right bar to operate from. Absolutely.
These are features that are quite cool, and it's kind of been added kind of silently. Olav and I have been talking previously about the live transcription in Windows 11, so where you can transcribe information from any audio feed on your computer directly on Windows, and we have the same feature in PowerPoint. So doing that transition and being able to translate language, it's quite neat. What other features do you think that we're going to see other than what you said? Windows Recall, you mentioned something there.
Yeah, so I'll move over to some of these new devices. So far we've kind of been talking categorically about like the Copilot Plus PC. Specific to Surface, we have two new devices. We have the Surface Pro, or you may or may not see it seen as the Surface Pro 11th edition, but realistically it's kind of our Pro moving forward. Or you'll see like our laptop or laptop 7th edition. Both of these devices are definitely the newest from a hardware perspective. So all new capability, we got like OLED coming out on on Pro. We've got this awesome new Flex keyboard, which mine's coming in soon. I'm super excited. But to your point, there's AI capabilities that come with these devices as well. So the most obvious one's probably what we call Windows Studio Effects. Windows Studio Effects have been out since Surface Pro 9 5G. And so you have capabilities like background blur, which we've talked about, voice focus. So again, kind of isolating my voice away from other noises and being able to very clearly hear me. You've got portrait blur as well. So it's kind of like a light blur. And then you have eye contact, which is this kind of semi-creepy thing where it keeps your eye kind of focused and everything. Those are evolving for Copilot Plus. We're actually including new Windows Studio effects, including what we call teleprompter eye contact. So this ability it very hyper focuses to make sure your eyes are almost always dead center, which is really great. Like if you're like me and I kind of look everywhere when I'm talking, it's nice for your eyes to really stay kind of focused because it makes you much more connected with the individuals that you're talking to. We have new creative effects, so making it look like you're a water paint or a watercolor, not a watercolor, but like an illustration as your thing. And especially if you're waking up a little rough, maybe it'll kind of smooth some edges for you, make you look a little younger. So those are some of those effects, and all of those models come pre-built into the device. So you might need some updates, absolutely. So there's some definitions that you're going to want to probably download. But for the most part, it's all kind of baked into the device without having, to traverse the cloud to get that. So you can take that initial update, and then those devices will kind of stay local. Or sorry, those experiences will stay local. The other one, as I mentioned very quickly, is this recall. And recall is honestly, it's groundbreaking. And I think one of the coolest things about recall is it will enhance the way that people can retain information. I don't know about you. I can't remember anything anymore. Like I just have the hardest time remembering what day it is, let alone where I lost a presentation. Recall is going to provide just that. It's the ability to recall really what you've done across the device. And so if I'm looking for a certain presentation, I can naturally ask recall to help me find, hey, I was working on a presentation about Security Plus. Like, what is that? And it'll go find that moment in time on my device and bring it to the forefront, and I can easily open up that application real quick.
Is it a little bit like a GoPro camera, but with AI to search?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, exactly. It's becoming an extension of your memory, right? That's kind of the way to think about it. Is the device is remembering things for you, and really kind of looking at whatever you want it to. And I think that last mention that I just provided, which is whatever you want it to, is really important, because one of the things that Microsoft is very keen on with any of these experiences is this idea of responsible AI and being very responsible with the privacy and the controls that you have as an end user. So Recall, for instance, because it can see everything, obviously we want you to have full control of whether or not it sees certain things you don't want it to see. So you can block it from certain applications. You can block it from certain web browsers when you're using like a Chrome-based browser. It'll automatically not look at like DRM protected information, and we're also using information to help block from seeing your most secure information around like banking and whatnot. And the other piece is we're actually building in all sorts of new technology and new securities to make sure that it is you that's looking at that information. So it's actually going to be backed by Windows Hello. In fact, Windows Hello is going to be required to even use it, because we want to make sure that it's you looking at your information and that you're actually in front of your device. So that way someone couldn't try to hack in, right? Like you have to be present. You can't spoof you. You have to be there in order to open that information. And so that's going to be critical to the experience. And I would argue in a lot of ways, that's one of those things where AI in general is all about the responsible use of it and the responsible availability of it. And I think the NPU, bringing it locally instead of having to send it to cloud, actually does also enhance that privacy story significantly, right? Because I'm now minimizing that attack surface, and I can do all those things locally. So yeah, that's that's what's coming out right around the corner. In fact, next week you'll start seeing some of these experiences. Some will probably still need an update down the road. Where I see things going, where I want to see things going, is what I kind of mentioned earlier, which is this idea of proactive intelligence. We can move to a point where I can now really experience anything and everything that I'm doing on a device with kind of like a more natural way of thinking. Like if you think about SEO, search, right? Back in the day, we really had to come up with a language in order to like search and do better search and everything like that. And eventually that became more natural. You know, if you look at like Bing and Google, it's pretty easy to just ask it a natural question. It'll come up with an answer. Well, we kind of need to get that to a point from a pure PC perspective as well. Whether that is, hey, I want to, maybe I'm just kind of thinking of what I want to do for the day. So I'm like, hey, I want to start a meeting and make sure I have this presentation. I want to get to a point where I can logically ask my computer in that fashion. And I don't need to open up Outlook or Teams and then start a meeting and then go find that application and then go find that presentation as well. Like I can naturally ask my device roughly what I want it to do, and the device will understand that I'm trying to bring all these capabilities, and it'll naturally bring it all together, at least suggest what I should be doing, what I should be opening. And it'll do that in a fashion that's not annoying. Like that's the other thing, is like every time I start kind of thinking about my brain instantly goes to Clippy, right? Like I don't want Clippy again. Clippy was cool, but like I don't want Clippy. I want something that's non-intrusive but supporting. And I think AI is that whole idea of a co-pilot. And that's actually, one would say, why we very strategically called these things co-pilot. That's the direction we go. We want a co-pilot. We want an assistant. We want someone that can really help you do better things, to do more things with your device. And so that's the future that I see happening really quickly and right around the corner. And on top of that too, I just think a lot of this stuff is just going to continue to get refined, right? Even voice focus is actually a good example. Voice focus has been out on AI PCs on laptop 6 and Pro 10. You can get that today. And again, what that does is that isolates your voice away from other sounds. On Copilot Plus, it not only isolates your voice from other sounds, it actually isolates your voice from other voices. And so those models will continue to improve. Those models will be more specific and be more hyper-focused on what they're trying to achieve. And I think it's just going to go crazy from here. I mean, like, I can't even imagine the sheer amount of change that we can see in this industry. And I'm just very excited to be a part of it.
I'm super excited for Olav to get one of these devices to edit all of our Blue Screen Brothers videos on them with the new AI tools, because he's still kind of doing this on his RT device, and he's always complaining.
It would sure be helpful when you get 70% of the work offloaded, like I do with GitHub Copilot. So it will help me be efficient with the task I'm doing, and that's really what we will see, that the Copilot Plus PC will help us in other ways in the same way.
Yeah. I don't know how much time we have.
Well, it seems like we're running quite close on time. Any finishing words here, Olav, or do you really just want to run and grab one of these devices so that you can replace your RT?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure, because I love my RT, but it's about time. But I still actually have upgraded it into a Surface Laptop Go 3, so it's not RT anymore. So
I look, I can go on and on for hours about this. I think there's such an amazing future. I think AI isn't actually just an NPU story. It is still part of the cloud, right? Cloud is always going to be around, and I think there's this notion of your device being kind of the eyeballs talking to the brain in the cloud, right? I think there's that kind of notion. But the ability to bring things locally is such a cool new thing that I think is just going to be so critical to computing moving forward. So appreciate the time, appreciate the ability to kind of rant and go on my stories here, and I would love to. Always happy to talk about it. So thank you so much, Alex and Olav, for inviting me.
A quick question, and then what's your favorite Surface device.
You don't ask people about their favorite kids.
No.
That is a hard one. I'll be honest, I love the Laptop Studio 2, especially just because I do a lot of videos editing, I do a lot of occasional gaming, I do a lot of things that require quite a bit of heavy workloads, and so I love having that very powerful device. But I will say right now, I'm a big fan of this Pro 10. I'm actually running on a Pro 10 right now, and I'm super excited to get my hands on these new Copilot Plus PCs. We'll see how those go. But yeah, I think my favorite device, probably a Laptop Studio 2, just because it's a cool form factor. So it's really cool.
Yeah,
I
really love the Surface headphones because that's a nice addition. So I love the headphones as well. So
yeah, I do love the headphones. They're great for travel. I've got mine right there actually. Yeah, they're very handy, very handy.
Yeah. It's a nice way to keep the voice of my wife away when I'm sitting on the airplane. So
it helps me go to sleep. That's for sure. And I don't sleep very well, so I need that sound isolation. Yeah, Alex, thank you so much. I actually I imagine you probably say this all the time, but I also want to just say thank you so much for being such an active member of our Surface MVP community. I didn't even mention that earlier. I'm one of the Surface MVP leads, so I'm a huge fan of all the work that you and Olav do, and thank you so much for bringing me onto this podcast, and hopefully I can join you guys here in the future, and we'll talk about more AI or security or kind of whatever else you want.
We'll drag you in when we have more NDA stuff to share.
There you go. Let's find the secrets.
All right. Thank you so much, and have a great one.
You too. Thank you. Have a good one.